Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 19th, 2019 work session of Methacton School District Board of Directors. Please rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purposes of rebroadcasting. An executive session of the board was held on February 12th, 2019 in the Farina Administration Building for the purposes of 1, consulting with our attorney regarding information and strategy in connection with the lawsuit captioned SWD 101 LLC and WNR 38 LLC versus Montco Board of Appeals, docket number 2006-31345 in the Court of Common Pleas for Montgomery County, and 2, holding an information and strategy session related to collective bargaining negotiations with the Methacton Education Association. An executive session of the board was also held on February 19th, 2019 in the high school prior to this meeting for the purposes of consulting with our attorney regarding strategy in connection with the lawsuit captioned Applied Landscaping Technologies versus Methacton School District, docket 2017-00181, and Applied Landscaping Technologies versus Dr. David Zerbe, docket 2017-17214 in the Court of Common Pleas for Montgomery County. It's a mouthful. By way of attendance, we have all of our board members here this evening. Recognition of guests and scheduled speakers, I turn it over to Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Ms. President. This evening we have a number of scheduled speakers. We have the master plan, security camera system recommendation, Arrowhead forward, timeline, and unified sports. This evening we have the Fadavia team and Mark Fretz here to discuss the master plan, Arcola change orders, and high school MEP project.
Good evening. The first 4 items on the agenda, as far as the change orders go for the auditorium project, I'm going to introduce Mr. Don Kozer from our firm. Don can better address any questions you may have pertaining to these, since he was involved on a daily basis in administering this project. So I'm going to turn this over to Don right now.
Good evening. The 4 change orders are all with the same contractor. It's Pinnacle Electrical, and all of the change orders relate to electrical components inside the auditorium. Change order number 6 is for light switch controls in the 2 LGI units that are at the back of the auditorium. And the design included control with the main Crestron unit, but the request was to have independent control in each one of those units, so that's what this change order involves. Change order number 7 and 8 sort of go together. They relate to the lighting and sound controls that are in the auditorium that are used for performances and functions in there. The number 7 is to supply a connection for the unit that adjusts the lighting on the stage. There are 2 other areas where this is done, but the request was made to have a 3rd connection made up in the projection booth, because occasionally the person who controls the lighting is up in that area and felt that that would be an advantage for him. Number 8 is the controls for the sound system, which is called a Crestron unit. And in addition to that, the Crestron unit has limited control over the lighting in that they call them lighting sets. You can create a particular lighting scene and then transfer it over to the Crestron unit, and that way whoever is operating the lights for the show can go from one set lighting condition to another. And again, it was felt that it would be better or good to have another connection up in the booth. The fourth item is change order number 9, and there was a control box that was located at the back of the auditorium, but it's on the ramp that leads from one of the hallways, and for safety reasons, it needs to be relocated. That particular change order is, the cost of that is being covered by the architect and the engineer who designed the project, because they realized that that particular issue should have been caught during the design process, so they have agreed to take care of the cost of that. In addition, the prices that are listed on your sheet reflect a total cost of about $10,400. The contractor has agreed and will submit a revised change order that if we allow him to work on all 4 of the change orders at the same time, they are willing to reduce their cost to $9,000, which means that the total change orders for 6, 7, 8, and 9 will be a $9,000 total, but because the architect and engineer are contributing $1,000, it will only be an $8,000 change order cost to the school district.
Any questions for members of the board? No? We'll move forward on put those on the agenda for next week for your approval. I think the next one is the high school MEP project.
That's correct.
Okay.
Tonight, we're asking the board to consider and approve moving forward with engaging Moore Engineering of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for design services at Methacton High School for the unit ventilator project at a fee not to exceed 5% of the construction costs for this project. This proposal has been developed by Moore as a result of a request from the Property and Transportation Committee upon them delivering some studies on dehumidification and items such as that. It's, like I say, it's an evolution of that process. We firmly believe a lot of the legwork done by Moore is already being done and it contributes, which this 5% price is a good figure for this type of project, considering a lot of his legwork, preliminary legwork, has already been accomplished. So there's an advantage there. I'd be glad to address any questions on the project that board members might have.
Any questions from members of the board?
Yes.
Sorry.
I guess, could you just give me a little more background information, I think I know what it is, but on what the unit ventilator project is and what the expected cost of it would be? Because right now this fee is variable.
Right.
So I have no idea.
Right. We have a range. The scope of work will cover the replacement of the unit ventilators in all the individual classrooms of the high school, first level and second level. We have a preliminary estimate from Moore, based on their previous studies, between $2,400,000 and $2,900,000 to complete the design. That's the construction cost. Their 5% would be based on wherever that fell. Does that answer your question as to the scope of the price?
So generally 120 to 145,000.
Roughly, right.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Navarrete?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So when we talked about this last night, one of the questions was about this 5%, right? I think it's, in my opinion, it's kind of an odd way to to write this resolution. I'd rather see it with a firm dollar figure there. Just for everybody else's information on the project. So we had talked specifically about a lot of dehumidification projects, and we talked specifically about this one, I think, in last month's meeting, maybe the one before, when we started talking about the surplus. What Fidavia has done is they've scoped out with more, basically 3 areas within the high school that we can either package together or it can be done individually. And what we've asked them to do now is to go back and kind of bid this out in, pieces or in summary, and they're going to talk to basically potential contractors and see what's the best way to make this fit, that we could do it at the least cost. And it might involve some classroom changes. Can we extend the project, into the school year and save some money that way, do all the messy work during the summer. I guess I say all that, I guess leading to this, Bob, is how are we going to pay the design firm for designing this if we're not going to accomplish this project? Maybe we don't finish it for another 2 or possibly even 3 years.
Right, that's to be determined, and to be honest, we don't physically have the agreement in hand yet. We're awaiting the final version from Moore, but we know it's going to be based on 5%. That detail will be worked out because, as you said, there may be a number of different approaches to this as far as phasing it in coordination with the school activities, taking advantage of the summer when there are no students here, but possibly having to get into some second shift work at the end of the day. That's a detail to be worked out.
Yeah, one of the things that, one of the things that Dan talked about last night, Dan Sakala, was that he would do this at an hourly rate not to exceed, I think.
Yeah, that's a typical approach in something like this. When you identify a percentage, you also come up with that figure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my preference would be that we just put a cap on the dollar amount and say this is what it is based on, rather than, I just don't, unless you can explain to me how the mechanism is going to work.
That makes perfect sense. Having that, we had this meeting last night, we were able to get, some of this documentation on here to at least have the conversation. But what we'll do is we'll work for that before Tuesday's meeting.
Yep. Great, thank you.
Okay, we'll contact more on that subject.
And one other thing, so this project, just to make sure I understand, it's including this fee, it's $2.5 to $3 million to solve humidity issues at the high school? Or is this end-of-life units, or is it? I'm just trying to get an understanding of.
Mr. Fretz.
Because I don't know if we've had.
Yeah, I think we got to refer back to the facilities assessment, and then, because this was one of the part of the facilities assessment.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, this is correct. I mean, there's a number of steps to work through the high school, and all of them, just like last year, will help remedy the humidity issues in the building. Every time we take a step here with new equipment and changes in design, that's what it's geared towards. So these new unit ventilators that they're talking about will be active dehumidification, not a passive dehumidification like we had. But there's also other pieces of equipment here that will have to be addressed in a later phase or at a different time, or however, we work through this process.
So what's the, I guess, while we've had a number of discussions about this whole item in property committee, it's probably clear now that we're talking that not everybody on the board has heard this conversation. So what's the difference between a passive and an active dehumidification process? And what generally is the main issue with our high school dehumidification and the heating and cooling associated with it?
So in the school, typically what we have are cooling coils in our units to reduce the temperature, which is great, except without a heat load, we don't dehumidify. So to add active dehumidification, whether it's through a DX unit where we're much like your units at home, where you have, probably are familiar with that, you see the water dripping out, you will have a heating coil also. So what we'll do is we'll take the air temperature down and then we reheat the air back up, and in that process we wring the moisture out of the air. And when all those units are doing that, we should be able to get our humidity levels down within the the correct ranges. So we should be running somewhere maybe around 50%, 40% in the buildings. 30 to 60% is kind of like an acceptable range. But many times here we're running in just about what it is outside, and that's what we have.
Thank you for the explanation. Other questions?
Sorry, one other thing. Is the thinking that this gets done in the summer of 2019 as an additional project, replacing something else, or what's kind of the thinking on timing?
I think what
And also why, I mean, we've had issues in some of the elementaries, for example, and we're going after the high school as opposed to some of those other locations.
So I think with the last one, there was a lot of conversation about that as well. The challenge is there's dehumidification challenges in probably most of our schools, if not all of them. And so, the issue is, when do we best address them? And it's really unreasonable for us to think that, we can do design work for all the facilities and then, somehow, peel all this off, because by the time we do all that, with the amount of, we're talking about maybe a $3 million project here, that's a lot to consider when we hit some of these other buildings as well. So what I mean by that is, we need to start with the process, design, implement, and learn from that, but those particular experiences before we go out and just design for all the buildings altogether. So, is this project designed to start next year? I think the intent is to get the design done, to shop the options, and to have the board consider the bids that are received. We did say last night that we are likely, by the time we get to market, we're going to be at a tough time. So the challenge is to make sure that we know where we should be falling with this, and if we don't get the best prices on this, we already have the design in place as a result if you approve this action, and then we shop that around the following year. When it's at a time that's better suited for getting the best prices. So it's something that needs to get done as part of the facilities assessment. It's in the master plan. It was actually part of, I guess, one of the original first-year projects, possibly slated for an original second-year project. But as you recall, we had a lot of humidity issues this past summer. I think it rose to everyone's attention. And it's clear that we need to start somewhere, and while we need to do it in all of our buildings, we got to start somewhere. So we can start at the high school, we can start at an elementary building, but we have 1,500 students. Probably the best opportunity to get something going this summer if we're going to do it would be at the high school.
One question I had is, he just said the first level. Is it just the first level, or it's all the first and second?
No, it's first and second level.
Okay.
Yeah,
So there's actually, they broke the project up into 3 options. Do you know what those options, can you explain those 3 options, Mr. Fetz, so everyone knows?
I'm just trying to pull, there it is.
The first floor and the second floor.
While they're looking for that,
Yeah.
let me just add that this is part of the second phase of the MEP work at the high school that we postponed from this summer because we consolidated work around the ceiling and the roof and the HVAC system for the Arcola Auditorium. So this is work that had been postponed. There was, as Dr. Zerbe said, extensive discussion in committee about humidity issues and how we're going to deal with it, and whether we approach the elementary schools, the high schools first. A gentleman from Moore Engineering came in, I thought gave it, and I don't know, as an engineer myself, I thought it was an incredibly detailed, and frankly, it was interesting, and I know maybe the rest of the committee wasn't so thrilled with it, but I thought it was great, about the different options, why we were going with what we were doing, and the discussion right now is how much and how to pay for it and when. And I think we're very close to that point now. Sorry, Mark, I'll kill him.
No, so the first floor, there was a first floor area that goes pretty much across the classrooms that would be going across the front of the building on both sides of the office area, and then the second floor of that area was what we were considering. The third part of this, the third area that we have are the rooms, of course, that we over above the east wing. and on the first floor of the east wing.
And from a priority perspective, looking at which one to do first, the first floor classrooms are the priority because they are closer to grade, where you do have more ambient air that is sucked in, that is more moist than you would on a second story. So when we look to prioritize, and the areas were roughly, I should pull it up, but it was roughly $1 million, and I think maybe 500 after that. Thanks, Mary. But yeah, total about 2.7 overall. So they're going to look at options, come back with recommendations as to, first the design as to how we bid this out, and then the design work will be complete. And then Fidave is going to put together the bid packages, hopefully to suit what we do. So the idea being that whatever portion of this project that we do, and I don't think doing it all this summer is likely, the messy work gets done during the summer where we've got to run new lines, and the actual unit ventilator work then could take place even during the school year. It might require some classroom swaps and things like that as they work through, but it's stuff that, as Bob noted, that could take place, second shift where guys show up at, 4 o'clock, knock out a classroom, come back the next day, do the next one, that kind of thing. So it's not ideal, but this is, I think we're all keenly aware that we don't want to punt these issues down the road any further than they've already been punted. So this is where we are.
The only thing that I'll add real quick is I won't reiterate what everyone's already said, but we did talk about this extensively, and I was, we need to do this smartly, and whether we do it in this amount of time or that amount of time, we needed these design services to figure out kind of, like you said, how to bid it. But I just will remind everybody that a close by district had to close their high school for a couple weeks last fall, summer, so just keep that in mind.
Does anyone have any other questions for Fidavia, for Mark? Okay. Is there anything else as part of your presentation this evening? I think that's all we had.
No, that's it for me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to Dr. Cesanovic and the security camera system recommendation.
Good evening, everyone. All right, so I did pass out two pieces of paper to each of you. One is a project executive summary that I shared last night at the property committee, and another one is a school reference sheet for Access Security Corporation. So I'm going to start off with just providing a project overview. So this camera project born out of a 2016 facility assessment study that identified our current system was in need of replacement. That study was then supported by our safety assessments that were completed in 2017 and 18 respectively. That specific study recommended that the district increase the security camera coverage in all schools, noting that the elementaries currently did not have any at the time. In September 2018, I met with our Safe School consultant, school administrators, and school officers to identify their needs relative to a new system and also coverage. Throughout October and November, we evaluated current and emerging surveillance systems and solutions providers that would best meet our needs. We brought 3 vendors in and provided an in-depth demonstration on various systems, as well as their service model to district administrators and school officers. The top system that came out of that process was Exact Vision using Samsung cameras provided by Access Security. We requested Access Security to come and provide district-wide recommendation and consultation services for our surveillance camera placement and installation. In December, members of Access assessed each of our buildings with the principals and school officers to determine the appropriate camera type and layout recommended on layout recommendations based on school industry standards. We presented this project update in the January 14th executive session, and then again last night at the property committee with Mr. Navarrete. Before I start going into talking about the details of the specifics in terms of the recommended surveillance system, I just want to briefly introduce you to Mr. Dan Cogan, who's the president of Access, and allow him to briefly share about his company and services. Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me here tonight. My name's Dan Cogan, President of Access Security. Just to tell you a little bit about our company, we work with a number of schools. I'm not sure if everyone got the references list that of the school districts that we work with. We work very closely with all of those school districts from a point of design, where we actually sit down when they're building new schools or renovating schools, looking at the security aspects of those schools, working with the consultants and the architects and so forth to make sure that they basically get a system that works throughout the district. What we found, and the reason that we've been brought into so many school districts, is we would end up with a mishmash of systems that would be out there. So our goal was to look at long-term plans, sit down with districts, look at how we can bring everything into a single user interface, which is beneficial to the police departments, to administrators, that everyone can then see one single system that works throughout the district, as opposed to various different systems, which a lot of times used to happen very frequently. Has gotten better, and we've helped a lot of the school districts in the area with those type of aspects. About 65% of our business is done in the education vertical. That goes K through 12, both public and private. A lot of the parochial schools, the intermediate units, and then as well as higher education. You know, we really do, and I think one of the things that rings true with a lot of the references, and the reason that we get referred to time and time again, we've started doing schools back 20-some years ago, and we've grown through the education market organically, and it's been through references. So one school recommends us to another school recommends us to another school, because they've run into these issues and they're looking for someone that can really give them guidance, and that long-term guidance, to make sure that they're going with a plan that's going to work long-term, that's not going to be something that's in a year or 2 years there's going to be another issue with, and there's a replacement and so forth that would go forth. What you really want to look for is how do we address this long-term plan, and how do we look for a solution that's going to give the district the most flexibility in growing the system and making sure it's going to meet those long-term needs. Any questions? I guess not. Good.
Yeah. So the system we elected to move forward with, as you see, is a video management solution called ExactVision. This will provide us a system that will be accessible across platforms, so mobile, computers, independent browsers. It'll give us some advantages of allowing our local law enforcement to access our systems when we deem necessary. Advanced search capabilities. One piece I want to highlight with this system, it was kind of discussed in a little bit more detail last night, is this system, it was important for us to find an open platform system. So meaning we're not pigeonholing ourselves to a particular platform. So all the cameras that we're purchasing and all the infrastructure and everything we're putting in place, if ExactVision went out of business, say, you know, in 5 years or whatever, we're not stuck having to make a reinvestment in cameras and all of that. We're not going to be in that position, because all of the stuff that we're putting in place supports what's known as OnViv, which is an open framework for these cameras. So we would be able to get another system and, again, still reap the benefits of the investment that we've made. And again, with our this system, obviously we'll get, you know, much improved coverage, as well as, you know, clarity of video, etc. One thing just to highlight, this system does not do, there are new systems out there that do facial recognition and artificial intelligence and stuff like that, in terms of really, doing some very advanced suspect tracking features. This does not do that, and I just wanted to be upfront with that. So at the bottom of the page, you'll see what our camera distribution is. So you'll notice that total camera views exceeds our total cameras, which is actually the physical count, and that's because we'll be leveraging multi-sensor cameras. So we'll be able to install one single camera one physical unit, but actually have 4 different viewpoints out of that. So there's some advantages and also cost savings related to going in that direction. On the back side of the page, you'll see the coverage in general terms. Obviously, we're not explaining where specifically all of these cameras are, but in general terms, the comprehensive exterior coverage will be covering, entrances, main offices, bus lines, parent drop-offs, and other areas. Additionally, out of this project, we will also be covering areas that didn't have cameras, not beyond just the elementary school, but also our maintenance and bus garage. The total cost of the project is broken out for you. It's broken out by materials and installation of those materials, cabling, obviously installation of the cabling, the system itself, and then the switching. The total project minus then the award that we got for a grant I wrote in the summer from PCCD, which was $25,000, and then E-rate discounts is $448.80 in year 1, with a year 2 cost of $63.36 moving forward. In reference to the switching, I'll kind of keep it non-techy, but as I explained last night, to support this project and upcoming phone project, we need to replace our 2960 S-Series switches that are dispersed throughout the district. Currently, we have 43 of them, but we are reducing that footprint to 35. Those switches are end of life in terms of software support and hardware support in 2020. But the big piece is they don't have the adequate power over Ethernet, which is how all these cameras and phones will be powered to support those 2 projects. Just as an aside, so you understand, our current camera system runs on a completely separate network than our main data network. And so they have a separate HP network, and instead of replacing all of that equipment as part of this, we're going to eliminate that entire network and consolidate it up into our main data network and leverage like subnetting to separate all of the different traffic. In terms of where the money's coming from, I'm going to look at my esteemed colleague, Mr. Bricker, to share where the funds will be coming from.
So this is on the master plan projects for the summer of 2019. We have set aside over $650,000 for this project, and we should be able to handle it through the bond, which in the timeline from the Finance Committee, you'll see information on the March board meeting and then on the April board meeting associated with this.
And then finally, as a project timeline, I just highlighted last night's meeting, tonight's meeting, approval for moving forward for the project at next week's regular scheduled meeting. And if approved, we would start the project immediately, all work being done, second shift when students would not be here. We would look to wrap the entire project up, inclusive of training, by the end of June 2019. And so that's my summary for you, and I'll be glad to address any questions you might have.
Any questions from members of the board? Mr. Winters?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Just a quick question. The recommendations that came from the safety audit is what we're implementing from location and the amount of cameras?
They did not specify the exact amount of cameras. They indicated specific locations as we went through it, but in terms of number of counts, no, they did not.
So just generically, is it providing the coverage that we need with this $425,000 investment?
It would address all issues related to the closed circuit TV recommendations from those assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just
Mr.
one.
Bryant?
What's the estimated useful life of the new system?
The new system, that was asked last night. So each of the cameras have a 5-year warranty on them. So anything that happens with them, it's replaced. And Dan could come fill out, we don't envision having to replace this system at least within the next 10 years. There's no timeline for end of life of this product and or the cameras. But again, one of the design factors that we went forward with, you never could predict the future, and say the system Exact Vision does go sideways and no longer be offered as a company, we would then just have to incur the annual fee for the next software and still reap the benefits of the investment made.
Thank you.
Any other questions been said? Mr. Navarrete?
Yeah, I said enough last night, but first, thanks, guys, for the work that you've done here. Troy, thanks for spearheading this. Obviously, it's a much-needed upgrade for what we have now, and I think the additional access, the additional availability of the system is great. The one question I had, obviously, some of this is going to be installed at Arrowhead, and sometime in the next, 1, 2, 3 years, we're looking at some kind of effort over there, whether it's repairs or renovation or for building an entire new school. How much of this equipment, between cabling, between switches, between cameras, would we be able to then repurpose in that period?
So depending on what's decided with the school, all the cameras would be able to be taken down and reused at whatever capacity or configuration it's decided by the board regarding a school. Obviously, there would be installation or reinstallation costs associated with that, and the only other thing that I would probably see would be any type of additional cabling, depending on where we're moving the cameras. But relative to the entire system, it's going to be all centrally located here at Farina, and it's going to operate over our network. So it's just really a matter of the cabling and then taking down the camera and then putting it up in the appropriate locations.
Just one more question. Can you just talk about the E-rate program they talked about last night?
Yeah, sure. You may or may not be aware of a program offered through the FCC called E-rate, and actually, if you looked at your individual phone bills, you would see that you all contribute to this as a tax. And so what happens is part of a process to help get more infrastructure into schools. They designed this E-rate program to incentivize schools and to help subsidize those type of costs, and they broke them up into different categories, and it's really changed over the years. So initially, when on the onset of E-rate, you had different, you still have different categories, but you'd be able to go out and get E-rate on your cell phones. So you'd get a discount based on your free and reduced population and the amount of money that was awarded to the actual district. So it'd be things like your cell phone, website, network infrastructure, your actual phone system, and all of this. A lot of that stuff has moved away, and now they focus primarily on making sure that they've recognized all the end-user devices in the world are useless without a good, solid backbone and infrastructure. So they've really restructured a lot of the financing to support schools and getting high-speed internet, and then supporting that through very concrete network infrastructure. So in this case, we're able to, through a process that takes place, is we submit what is known as a mini bid and say we would like this type of equipment. Vendors then would bid upon it, and then after that bid process, we are awarded a certain percentage off after we select who we want to go with. In the case of this switching equipment, we get 40% off. And so we are actually going to see in the 1920 year a credit back to us, to Methacton, in this total of $53,000 approximately. The number is there for just specifically this. But every year, I made a point when I came here is to make sure we take advantage of as much E-rate funding as possible. We always submit for our telecommunication, our internet connections, and anything that we're available to get, we put out there, and we try to get that money back for the district every year. So,
thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Ryan?
Sorry, just one more I forgot. You mentioned that currently we have kind of two different networks where the video is on one and the data is on another. You're going to eliminate the one and roll it all up. Do we have enough existing bandwidth to take care of that? Yeah, so when we originally designed, when we came in here and I designed a new network, I always thought about year 5, 7,
and forward. So our network currently sits on a 10 gig backbone with gig ports throughout all of our IDF, MDF closets. To answer your question shortly, the answer is yes. And so what we could do is logically separate that traffic. That way we can put things like quality of service policies on data, not data, excuse me, but voice traffic that you would really notice if you lost like packets and stuff like that through a network.
I think, I don't want to get too technical here, but what the video networks used to do is constantly feed, or there was traffic all the time. With the new cameras, I imagine it's only on when there's movement, and they're only sending data in a much more compressed format as well.
Yeah, Dr. Zerbe is exactly right. The compression rates now with the video streaming are really quite amazing, and then like he mentioned, what we have the ability to do is really set how we want these cameras to operate. So we could do things like Dr. Zerbe mentioned and say we only want it to record all motion. And so not only does that save us on a bandwidth standpoint, but when you look at what are known as the MVRs, where all this data is stored, it actually allows us to store more and more data over longer periods of time, because you're not doing that 24/7, 365 recording of nothing. So it has intelligence enough to recognize that there's difference in the frame, start recording, capture that event. When that goes back to static, it'll shut off and not record.
Good. Any questions from this side? Anyone? Ms. Drummond?
I have a few. Can you tell me more about the interface that this camera system, the surveillance system, would have with the Lower Providence Police Department or with the state police?
Sure. So what it would do is we would provide access based on role-based security into our school cameras when we deem appropriate. So they would not have access to it where they could just jump in and look at our cameras at any given time. At the instance, we do have an event here that requires them to have access. It would be literally like turning a button, hitting a button. They would then be able to gain access through multiple ways, whether it be on their computer system or on a cell phone or something along those lines. And that's a direction that a number of law enforcement or school districts have put in place for our law enforcement responding officers to actually make better decisions as they're responding to an event. So instead of waiting to get here to see what's going on, they could actually start to assess and evaluate and then determine appropriate resources to come to the event based on what they see.
And that's true for both Lower Providence and the state?
Yeah, we work hand in hand with both.
And is the feed that's generated, is that in color?
Yeah, it's live and in color.
Okay. And how old is our current camera system?
About 10 years.
And you mentioned that this system doesn't currently have the capability of features like facial recognition. Does it have the capability to upgrade to those features if they become more accessible and cheaper?
Yeah, I don't know what the development path looks like for exact, but one thing with those features, they're always at our discretion whether to turn them on or off. So at any point that a feature would come available, we could evaluate whether or not it would still be appropriate for us. Even though it might be available, it's our decision whether or not to use it. It's not forced upon us to use it.
Okay, but it could be available within this system that we're looking at?
It could be, but I would say it's unlikely in the sense that most of the camera systems now that use that type of analytics are pushing that intelligence out on the camera, so at the end point. So another system we looked at that had that was called a Vigilon, and they have all of the technology built into the camera itself because it's so process heavy to do all of that artificial intelligence and analytics. The cameras that we are purchasing now don't have those built-in analytics, so we would probably have to do some sort of upgrade in terms of camera in order for us to do that.
Okay, and then my last question has to do with the costs going forward after year one. Are we entering then a contract with the provider to, for that fee per year for a certain amount of time?
So what that gets us is, with a support agreement or any future updates to the software and any type of, if something happens, we need to get, access to support. We don't have to go with that if we don't want to. So once we install this system, we put it in place, we could make a decision to say we don't ever want to go forward with support again, but we're stuck with that current system. It'll operate and work fine, but any future releases, any bug fixes, anytime we would need support, we would not be able to reach out to Exact Vision because we didn't engage in that annual agreement. So that's what that cost is for.
And is it, I guess I'm asking though, is it an annual agreement that we'd be
It's an annual,
entering to, not a
yes
term?
ma'am, it's an annual agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from to my left? If not, okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Cesanovic. Very good.
All right, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Wonderful work.
Are you okay to take you guys to the seats? And we'll do these next two. If the board would be so kind, for the next two presentations, we'll do them with you at the seats, and then we'll take questions so that we're not coming back and forth. So if you wouldn't mind taking seats in the front row. Please know that there are two handouts in front of you. So the next presentations are the Arrowhead Forward Facilities Consideration Timeline and the Unified Sports. So there's two handouts at your place for these. So just so you know, I've been up here texting and stuff all night, and so school is closed tomorrow.
And basketball winning, so.
Oh, good. I didn't know that. I wasn't. I'm sure the text was coming in on that, but I wasn't paying much attention to it. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. Normally I'm able to hear the echo, but apparently not tonight. Okay. So this evening, let me just bring the document up on screen. So this evening, I'm bringing forward a draft of what I'm calling Arrowhead Forward. As a result of the decision that the board has made in terms of the resolution back in January, it was discussed. So at that point in time, how do we move forward with this conversation? And so generally, I have before you in a draft format at your place and here up on the screen, a combination of a number of factors that I think we need to address in order to continue with the conversation and ultimately reach a decision on a path forward, which I have slated at the bottom in red in October of 2019. So if we start at the top here, my goal really is to present a preliminary timeline to the board this evening. Also in February to present the timeline and for approval. I'm not certain whether it's just something that we discuss or if we want to take a vote on or not, but I think it's important that we have at least some consensus to move forward with such a timeline in such an important process. And I think it's also important that we have a discussion to narrow down the proposed options. If you recall, back in January, I had outlined 6 potential options that the board could consider. 2 of those options, options number 1 and number 6, included Arrowhead as in the picture in the future, whereas choices 2, 3, 4, and 5 did not. So we need to decide whether or not we want to consider both of those options, or we think that only one is viable, and that as we move forward with the conversation, that we're solving for one or both of those matters. It doesn't matter. I think it's it's a matter of getting your feedback as a board as what you would think we ought to do. But we should at least establish what we're trying to solve for as we progress through the coming months. And then I thought it was important that as we go through this, and if you could scroll down, Dr. Cesanovic, to the first white area. And I don't mean to jump around, but I'm trying to give you some context of why we're doing some things here. The last item in the gray area at the top talks about an RFP process. So in order to really do this RFP process and to get design services in place, we want to have them in place so that when we reach the March through May timeframe, where we're getting input from the staff, where we're getting input from the community and so forth, we want them to be there as part of the process to make sure that we're gathering the right information and that they're collecting the information and not just getting it secondhand or third-hand from myself or other administrators, but they're there help guiding the process so that the information that we are gathering is helpful for the design and decision-making process later on in the time frame. So if you could go back up, Dr. Cesanovic, I appreciate your help here. So we're looking at putting an RFP out to get design services. We spoke about that last evening in the property committee. We will be proceeding with that, and of course we want to bring something back in March for the board's consideration. Just because we put an RFP out, if you don't think we ought to be getting design services, you make that decision in March. I mean, we're not expending exorbitant amount of time or money putting this RFP out, but it is, in my opinion, as well as in our professionals' opinions, that having them on board is important. Next, we go into the, I'll call it the beige or the pink area. We want to establish goals for this project, not necessarily knowing whether we're going to renovate, construct, or do a combination of the two. We want to make sure that whatever investment we make, we address the matters in the facilities assessment, but we want to make sure that along the way there aren't some other things that this board thinks is critical. Are we going to address full-day kindergarten as part of this building? Are we going to consider other things like, right now we know the gymnasium, is undersized. You'll hear that. You didn't see that in the facilities assessment report, but that's not necessarily the goal of the facilities assessment, to say that the gym is smaller than all of our other gyms and is generally not used for, activities other than physical education. But it's stuff like that. So I think it's important before we decide whether or not we're going to spend a potential $14 million or $25 million, that we at least have the conversation and say, these are the things we'd like to accomplish within the reach of the district. We approve the design services. We set up a number of communications. You'll notice this timeline has a number of blue areas. I think there's 5 in total. And all the blue areas represent is periods of time where we'll be sending communications. And at 5 different times in March, we see in April, May, August, and then again in September, where we'll be communicating with the public. And generally, we think that by setting up a part of our website to have all the information associated with this conversation be posted and available online for anyone to read is one part of this. But secondly, we want to make sure that we use a cost-effective manner to engage the entire community, which we would do through a postcard process. We also know that up in the green area, up at the top of the screen, we want to look at debt and funding analysis. I think it's critical, obviously, if whether we were spending $1 million, $14 million, $25 million, how might those expenses be addressed with our current debt, and how we would fund those that new debt in the future. And those are things that we need to consider. So as we're making a decision and narrowing our decision down to whether or not it's a renovation, a build, or a combination of the two, we have in the context of our ability to afford and our ability to pay as part of the overall concept. And then, of course, one of the big pieces, and one of the most, I think, one of the most important pieces is obviously getting feedback. We're talking about getting feedback from the staff. We're talking about doing building tours, not only of our other elementary schools, but of other targeted schools that were recently constructed, to understand, what might be in the works in some other areas. We want to have community input meetings. We want to certainly do a community survey, and all that information, with the help of the design professionals, will be allowed to gather and use as in the design process. We hope that in September then, we have we give the design professionals to put together, what the designs are. There could be one, there could be multiples, depending on the direction the board wants to give them. And then in September, we come back and we present those and cost options for the consideration. We have a public meeting to address any key concerns. We then communicate out again, and we then ask in October that the board consider, a path forward. That path forward doesn't mean that, next month we're going to, start renovating, or next month we're going to start constructing, depending on what the decision is. It could be a full year from this time frame before anything occurs. It could be some work gets started in the following summer. There's a lot of work that would need to go in place depending on what we decide. So if you could, as a board, hold your comments for right now. When we go back up to the table, we'll start with this, and then, we'll start with unified sports, end that conversation, and come back to this at the table if you have any questions. So the next presentation for this evening is unified sports. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Spiewak, who's here this evening, straight from Colorado. Actually, probably within like an hour or two, right? But Dr. Spiewak's here to introduce what we believe to be an exciting opportunity for a number of athletes here in the Methacton School District, and we hope that you consider this project. Dr. Spiewak?
Thank you. We did arrive back with all 27 students from Colorado, so that was a plus. I appreciate everyone having me here tonight to speak about unified sports. Our recommendation is to consider unified sports for this spring for track and field. Unified sports is a fully inclusive co-ed high school sports program. It includes students with and without intellectual disabilities. The track and field team for this spring, if approved, will be treated just like our other interscholastic sports teams. If you look at the three components, phase one would be a unified sports team for track and field this spring, and we would be considering component 2 and 3 as we move forward with this process. Some other Montgomery County schools, certainly there are more than just the schools that are listed, but Abington, Springford, Cheltenham, Souderton, North Penn, Harriton, Upper Merion, as schools in the area continue to add, certainly those schools would be considered for the schools that we would compete against in our 3 track meets this spring, if approved. Unified sports, I won't read the entire slide, but certainly the statistics show that unified sports will bring a number of things to our not only to our high school, but our community, and certainly will positively impact all of the students, not just the students that are participating. And if you look at bullet number 3, 97% of high school seniors say that unified champion sports are changing their school for the better. This is an opportunity for our school district to really improve, not just for those students, but for everyone. Some of the logistics for adding unified track and field at Methacton, there'd be 2 practices a week and 3 total track meets. 2 would be away track meets, 1 would be at home. They would, this team would share the track with our boys and girls track teams, as well as girls lacrosse and any of the other sports that would be utilizing the turf area. And certainly, as an athletic office, we would be, if approved, we would be dealing with the logistics of how that would all work, and we're extremely confident that it would work just fine, just like it does in the other school districts that were listed. The start and end dates mimic the sports season. So beginning of March every year would be the start of unified track and field. And in terms of our particular situation, we certainly have the ability to utilize a different start date if need be, in terms of, if approved and when we're up and running with all of the logistical tasks that need to take place before starting. The goal for the first year would be to have a roster of 14 students, 7 with intellectual disabilities and 7 without. In terms of a cost analysis, there are a number of items, and you'll see it on the next slide, that we would hope, as many of the nearby schools are already experiencing, that many of the costs are going to be donated time. With that said, we do want to prepare for if those end up being a cost to the district. Most significant cost is going to be for transportation to the 2 away meets. Special Olympics will cover the uniforms, equipment costs, and there will also be a stipend involved for the district. Athletic training, nurses, PCAs, that cost analysis is being done, but certainly we will ensure that the proper coverage takes place for both the practices and the meets. In terms of meet officials, we're very confident that the 2 officials we would need for the home meet, as well as some other services that would take place to make the meet run smooth, would be donated time. Here's some hard numbers for you to consider. Nursing services are $52 per hour. The season would be approximately 40 hours. Could be a little bit more than that in terms of the hours. Could be a little bit less. PCAs will be on a need basis. So until we have the team selected and we have an understanding of the students involved, the PCAs are challenging to predict. Meet day expenses would be donated. Travel expenses, you're looking at approximately $400 per away meet, with those 2 meets equaling $800. That could go up depending on what type of bus we would need to transport the students, which we would know a little bit more once the team was selected. Coaching salaries are listed, and the equipment and uniforms, as was mentioned on the last slide, are no cost to the district. Looking at an approximate cost for the spring of 2019 of right around $4,195.20. So we are seeking approval tonight to have a unified track and field team for the spring of 2019. On this slide, you'll see a timeline that we are currently following in order to try, if approved, to make sure that this is prepared to go for this March. We have an informational meeting that was scheduled for tomorrow that will be rescheduled for Monday night at 6:30. And the first day of PIAA sports begins on Monday, March 4th. Our target date for the last day to sign up would be March 11th, and March 13th to 18th would be the targeted start of Unified Sports. And we're working with Special Olympics and Unified Sports to confirm when those 3 meets would take place, depending on, us hitting all of our goals for this timeline. And just a special thanks to Nikki Brislin and Sarah Quintos, both teachers at the high school, for researching this program over the last year or so, and for providing much of the information that came to administration in this PowerPoint.
Just we'll take questions on Unified Sports first, and then we'll Thank you, Dr. Spiewak. Members of the board, I just want to let you know that, first of all, we're not working in the assumption that you will approve this program, first of all. But I will tell you that after the conversation we had with the Education Committee, working together, we thought in the best interest of our students, and certainly not only interest, but the opportunity that this provides for our students. It was best if we orchestrated a timeline that didn't assume that you were going to approve this, but allowed us an opportunity to at least get in front of this and get this started this school year, considering all the aspects. So one of the things that we were trying to do is have this parent meeting. I think the Special Ed Alliance was very helpful in trying to communicate out that information so that we could get feedback from the parents about some of the things that we may not have considered in terms of what we need to plan for to make sure that this is as successful as possible. The hope is that if on the 26th you agree with me and the administration that this is a worthwhile program, we would be in high gear to inform all the student body and start moving forward with this. Mr. Regina has posted and has interviewed and has a recommendation. I believe it's in this agenda for the coaches. So if we approve the program, we approve the coaches, we are in good shape to have this start in a delayed time frame, which is fine with the gentleman who runs this from Special Olympics. I will let you know, the only drawback to starting not on March 4th is that if our team was selected to go to states, we would be not eligible to apply or to go to states for this year, which, in my opinion, while that's maybe a deficit, is certainly not enough to deter us from moving this thing forward. That's my opinion. So, questions from members of the board?
I just wanted to reiterate what Dr. Zerbe said, because we did go over this at the education chair, and in a perfect world it might have been brought to us a month ago at education, but it wasn't, and we had said if we have the support and we're able to do it, and Dr. Spiewak and everyone else involved were able to do it, to go ahead and do it. And just for the rest of the board to know, one of the big things was this training that occurs. So we kind of needed, if we were going to do this, for the coaches to go to this training. So, I'm not apologizing, but I am just saying we all did discuss at education that a month ago would have been nice, but I don't want to squabble about that, because what matters is that you brought it to us. You were able to logistically work it out, and I appreciate that effort in that small amount of time. And it's wonderful, and we're excited to do this, and we appreciate Dr. Sergini and Dr. Spiewak and everyone, and the special, a couple parents from Special Education Alliance were there, and so thank you for getting the parent meeting going, and it's exciting, and thank you to getting it up and staffed. So I was pleasantly surprised to see this on there this evening.
Well, only because there was a lot of discussion about it. Any other comments from my left? Ms. Drummond?
I'm also really excited about this program. I just was wondering about the roster goals. So the goal for the first year would be to have a roster of 14, and if for some reason fewer students than that sign up, or more than that sign up, that would still be accommodated?
Correct. Souderton High School has a huge program that has been building and building each year, and in conversation with their administration, they are just now getting to the point where they have to make some decisions on how to control the number, but we would be far from that number for the first year or two. So yes, we would be able to accommodate less, and we would be able to accommodate more as well. Yep.
Any other questions from my left? Ms. Cankrell?
I just want to say that I was one of those that was definitely pushing it forward, so I thank you for that.
Thank you.
To my right, anyone? Mr. Ryan?
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I think this is a perfect opportunity as a way to move Methacton forward. I thank all those who did their research in this, especially the 2 teachers you mentioned. Just one thing that kind of jumped out at me was the 97% of high school seniors say that Unified Champion Sports are changing their school for the better. I mean, I think that speaks for itself. Only question I do have is, I'm assuming that there was kind of the testing of the waters, when we said the 7 and 7. Do we have interest in this that's kind of ready to go?
Our opinion is absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Certainly can't say for sure. The meeting will be tallying on Monday, but certainly we believe we should have no issues getting to our target number.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Winters?
Thank you, Dr. Spiewak. I want to thank also the SEA for pulling us along with this process as we have, I know the administration has looked over this for the last couple of years, but the push of the SEA and really pushing us over the edge is very much appreciated, and I certainly think it fits into the strategic objective of whole child, and hopefully in a couple of years we're talking about expanding it into Arcola.
Anyone else? Mr. Navarrete?
Yeah, this is fabulous. I'm glad we're doing this. What does the rest of the program look like outside of track?
There are a number of options. One thing that typically progresses, at least in the nearby schools, and in speaking with Mike Bavino from Special Olympics, the typical progression would be starting with spring track and then considering bocce in the winter, which is a huge program that they run. And then there's some fall options as well that would typically be a potential third step.
So spring track is the entry point?
Correct.
To get in? Okay, because I haven't been part of any of these discussions so far, so I'm wondering why this came so late in the game.
There are a number of factors that we considered as an administration when it was brought to us, a number of concerns that needed to be worked out, and while I can't speak to all of the factors, there were a number of things that needed to be dealt with before we felt that we were prepared to move forward with this.
How about the, as far as paying coaches for this, how does this, I know we have a point system for these contracts that is chock full of activities and clubs and athletics, and everybody's fighting for these points. So how did we find points for these, for this club?
So this is going to be listed under sports. It's not an activity, so it's not a club. So this is considered like boys varsity basketball or girls varsity basketball. It is, or high school or varsity track. So this is a sport and not a club. And certainly your concern about points is articulated in the presentation. The way that the coaches would be paid is through that system of points, but it doesn't go against the point allocation for the clubs as listed in the club the activity handbook. So it will be approximately about a $5,000 increase in that expense. That is not in the budget at this moment in time, so that will be, as we do our March update, we'll be talking about a number of things, and this will be one of them that will be added. Hopefully we have some subtractions as well, but nonetheless, we think, for $5,000 and the impact that we can make in this district with it, I think it's worth us considering and the board, supporting that.
Yeah, excuse me. My question's not a program one, it's a process one. So, thank you.
So No, good point. So process-wise, the board, for any club and/or for any sport, has the authority to, decide that a specific club or a specific sport is going to be adopted, regardless of the administrative guidelines associated with how we administer the activities and the sports in the district. At any point, we can add bocce, or we can add other courses, but we would certainly be coming before the board for those approvals with any of that. Any other questions related to unified sports? All right, Dr. Spivak, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So prior to unified sports, I had presented a draft Arrowhead Forward timeline. Again, we spoke last evening in property committee. We confirmed with Don Sakala that, an October 2019 decision point seems reasonable, giving the design firms, if everything falls in line here, enough time. Was also discussed if we needed an extra month, that we could, there's some wiggle room in the schedule. And other questions were, with all the other things that we're doing in the district, can we get this done? And I guess, the response is, I put this together, I'm saying yes, and the reason, more importantly, is, we've said that, the Arrowhead building, needed work on it, regardless of whether I can get this timeline done or not within a 3-year period. So we're coming up on that time frame. So I think we owe it to, ourselves, as well as to the community that uses Arrowhead as a school building, to ensure that we're on top of making whatever those in future investments might be. So the sooner we do this, the better. And I hope that this, fits into, a good framework for your consideration. So I'll take questions and try to answer them the best I can. To my right, Mr. Navarrete?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, can you elaborate? Last night you spoke to the reasons why we were bringing a design firm on so early in the process relative to input. Can you just speak to that tonight? Because I think it's an important point.
Yeah, so originally I had this design firm probably lower in the schedule, but after talking with Dan Sakala and talking with Mr. Fretz, they recommend that, in order to do this properly, having the design firm at the point when you're starting to get input from whatever group it will be, here will be teachers, the public, the board, etc. Having them come in afterwards makes it much more difficult for them to get the information firsthand in order to deliver a representable product or products for your consideration in the future if they're getting it secondhand. So being there up front allows them to gather the information. It also allows them to guide the information. We're going to be looking for a design firm that's been through this process before, that can give us, the guidance of the types of questions that we should be asking, and how we ask the questions, and how we organize community input in order to get the best response. So, it's important that, if we're going to spend $14 million or $25 million, that we have the input necessary and the guidance of the professionals to get this thing done. I can't tell you at this point in time what designs cost. I can't tell you those types of things. We just got the kind of nod, not necessarily approval, but the nod from the property committee last evening to kind of start doing a lot of research on how to get this thing done in the timeline that is presented. But Dan Sakala believes that there's a number of like 13, 14 different design firms in this space that could be, very supportive to this, process. So I hope that, kind of outlines where we're at with the design firm. Any other questions? Mr. Ryan?
Two things. In terms of the design services RFP, I would make sure that, I guess this is kind of part of the enrollment thing that came up, that we make sure that we include in the RFP hours necessary for the community meetings. Bringing the design firm on early, I think what would actually be useful to have them at these meetings so that they can handle and field questions from the public, rather than a lot of the "we'll get back to you" type of information. So I think that making sure that there's a numerous number of hours included in the RFP for that purpose would be good. The only other part I have on here is that the other responsible part where certain things are coming through property and certain things are coming through finance. Just the importance of making sure that even if it's going through that committee, that all items, I mean, this is a very important part of our next year, that all items come up to the full board at a work session or another, not just assuming that the information went through the one committee and they said it was fine, and then, you know, a couple months down the road, well, that already made it through committee and we're bringing it up to you. Just keep the entire board apprised throughout the entire process.
Yeah, so you make a good point, and maybe that's, you know, I'm going to take your lead on that conversation, only because I think it's sometimes when we utilize, you know, professionals in multiple meetings, it raises the cost of you know, it's an hourly type of thing usually. So I mean, if the board objects, then I'll deal with it some other way. But I'd prefer, you know, having all the communications run through the work session, and not necessarily run through the property committee, only for the simple fact that we don't necessarily repeat anything, because I think you're right. There's a lot, you know, there's a lot of conversation that happens in the committee meeting, and sometimes we miss some of that, and when we get back to the larger group. So as important of an issue this is, if everyone's okay with that, I'd like to just only come to the committee meetings of the board with any information and or you know, discussions. I mean, does that fit in line with what you guys are thinking, huh?
Work session.
Oh, the work session, yeah, I'm sorry.
I will say that's a great idea, because this is the first meeting where I've sat through every single one of the presentations, the first time in almost 4 years where I've had to hear things twice, because it just happens to be that those were my committees. It's the first time that every single one, and so much of it was important. And the repetitive questions are great. It means we're all thinking and on the same line, but absolutely 100% for their time too, because I even texted Ralph, I'm like, shouldn't these guys go? They were here last night, you know, isn't this costing us money, ka-ching? So yes, please. I think it's a perfect idea.
So I don't have any objection, we'll go with that. How about some other questions from my right? Mr. Winters?
I guess as part of it, I don't remember which, I think option 4 was a K4, and option 6 maybe was a K3, but I don't remember. But four K3 schools and 4 K4 schools, and what of it is around full-day kindergarten class size. So those type of discussions, I think, need to be part of the dialogue also somewhere along here. I don't see that as we have property and finance. I think there's an educational aspect that really is the driver for the design of what that would look like. And then the other, just crazy idea maybe in my thought, I know that we're going to get I suspect we'll get a comment related to communications and how this goes out to the entire community, and I think that was your recommendation, to get it out to the entire community through postcards, I think. I don't know if there's any possibility of us, when you get the Lower Providence newsletter once a quarter, there's a page on Parks and Recreation and so forth, that we could hook on with Lower Providence with a page around Methacton, and it may have some costs associated with it. It'd be one way to share the information in a regular manner about Methacton, and I don't know what Worcester has, but that may be some way to communicate things more regularly, which has been a request of many in the public that are not necessarily have students in the school district.
Mr. Winters, what I'll do, I took a note on that. I think that while we've done that from time to time, what I'm hearing is, you know, we should probably create the relationship so that both townships and the school district can regularly share information with our constituents with our regular publications on a regular basis, not just for this particular project. So good point. You know, we have a new dynamic communications coordinator, and she'll be on this tomorrow. And by the way, she doesn't know this.
She's off tomorrow now because of the snow. So don't make her work, you know.
Well, she's working right now because she's getting the calls out. You guys should have gotten your calls. But I can tell you, I don't know if you know this, but she also released the first showcasing the Pride of Methacton. So when you get a chance to read that, please do so. She did a tremendous job working with the art teachers in the district, as well as there's some videos there. We're going to use those same videos as part of meeting some of our strategic goals in terms of working with the realtors in the area. So I'm really proud of the work that she did, and I'm sure you will be as well. So when you see her next week, you let her know that.
I expect that the unified sports will be televised also some way.
At some point, we've already had conversations about that, absolutely. So to your point, great suggestion, because sometimes we just think, for this time, we've done that. We've worked with the 2 townships, and they've given us some space on their newsletter. But maybe there's a greater conversation that needs to happen. We'll have that, so thank you. Any other comments on the timeline from my right? How about from my left? Ms. Arborlis?
I just wanted to respond to what Mr. Winters was saying about the educational impact of all of this, and I think that at least how I'm interpreting this and how I envision this proceeding is that's going to be a big part of what we are discussing in terms of determining the solve-fors. So what are the issues that we are solving for? Because we're not just solving for an education or a building issue, a property issue. We are solving for educational and programming issues as well. So I think that I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that is important to make sure that stays front and center through the whole process.
Thank you. Anyone else to my left? Ms. Campbell?
My only question was, when you said we're going to look at, in February, determine among the 6 options, the best options, we're in February work session right now. So when do we discuss? I mean, I feel like to review them again.
If you're okay with this, I'd like to bring up that conversation a little bit next week.
During the board meeting versus the work session.
So what I believe could happen, we would raise the conversation about the options and determine whether or not we want to consider any of them going forward. We would then put that in our list of items to consider in the future, and then in March we would work towards setting some goals for the board, including the goals for whatever options we're looking at. And it doesn't necessarily preclude us that as we go through this process that we're stuck making this decision in February. I think you're going to find, as we do with a lot of things, as we gain input from folks, we gain some new information and new ideas, and it's possible that some where we started may not necessarily be where we end, and so I think that we can certainly do all this and have these conversations.
I just wanted to add, after talking about this last night and thinking about it, when we talk about the education part, and I see your notes there, when we're talking about K-3 and refiguring things and fitting in full-day kindergarten, I don't know if we can fit in here. I know Mr. Earnshaw's talked about a utilization report. I know Dr. Engsted's worked hard on it. It's very difficult sometimes to put numbers into blocks on a piece of paper to understand how we're utilizing also our Skyview and our COLA space. I don't know if this would help or be feasible, not just to put certain things to bed, but it's been brought up by members of the public a lot. If we are considering at all changing at all any configuration, we've made our resolution, would it be helpful to put in this timeline a time when the board, even if it's in 2 separate days, goes and looks at Skyview and Arcola in the middle of the day? I think, for me, when people keep bringing up utilization and numbers about, well, it used to be 800, and I've talked about how, not 1,400, and I know how education has changed. I've been in those buildings, but I've been in the parking lots, which is a whole nother story, but maybe it would be good just for us to feel like we're doing all of our due diligence, that we go in the middle of the day. I mean, I'm not in the schools very often in the middle of the day, and I'm certainly wasn't in Skyview or Arcola in the middle of the day because the children are older, So for me, it would be helpful to look at Skyview and Arcola one last time to just see if there is any of those options.
Yeah, I think we can certainly arrange for that to occur, so I'll add this to the timeline to make sure that we do that.
I don't think it has to be 9 of us, and we could do 2 separate quick things. It does not,
Yeah, however it works in people's schedules. I mean, some people might be more available than others, but nonetheless, we want to make sure that we do whatever is necessary to make, to inform you as we go through this process. But please know that of the 6 scenarios that I had presented, one included a reconfiguration and the other one didn't. And just because that's what I presented doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly how it has to be. So, there were a number of other scenarios that you might want to consider that also included reconfiguration, but those also considered not having Arrowhead Elementary School. So, ultimately what we decided in January was that Arrowhead Elementary School would continue operating as a building. And so how our schools and our school grade configurations look in the future is still up in the air, in my opinion, because I think there's merits to a lot of those options that you might want to consider.
My only, to go back, is I feel like we need to have board goals based on options to solve for first before we start eliminating the 6 options that will be presented to us. Like if we wanted, like you mentioned, gym size. I mean, that was something you just gave an example of, full day kindergarten. If there's certain goals that we want, there will be options that we will look for that will address our goals versus eliminating options. And maybe
Yeah, well, you know what, if it's more convenient, we can have that conversation at the same time. We can have the goal conversation and the options conversation at the same time. I'm not in any hurry. I think it gives us enough time to organize, and I can provide you as members of the board with some potential, guiding thoughts to consider, and that way you'll be much more prepared for the conversation in March than we would do it for next week. Is that fair? Okay, so I'll adjust that as well in the timeline. Any other questions to my left? Mr. Earnshaw.
I guess I'm just confused about a couple of things. One, you mentioned that reconfiguration is still an option, but that seemed like that was one of the big cons on some of the other options that were eliminated. So I just want to make that statement.
Well, if you remember the charts were clear about how the options would work.
No, I understand, but like a big con and a negative was the fact that we just reconfigured schools 2 years ago when Audubon closed, and now we didn't want to do it again that quickly, but now it seems like it's back on the table. So I just don't fully understand.
I asked for that request because, just so you know, because it's been brought up by one member, brought up Arrowhead being a kindergarten center. Like, what I meant was, if this is part of, as Kim said, not just a building issue, if our goal is full day kindergarten, we have to think about where's room for that. So we need to know, is there any, I do not see room for reconfiguration, but if we're looking at this again for kindergarten or for Arrowhead, what are we doing with Arrowhead? What do we need to fit into Arrowhead? We, in my mind, just needed to double check and cross our T's and dot our I's. Is it still K-4? I guess that's what I was asking.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It doesn't, but okay, I'll just.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, we need an Arrowhead. Since we're looking at this educationally, if we're looking at full day kindergarten in a K-4 school, that's a different building decision. That's, I guess, what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
I hear your point.
I'll just jump in.
Mr. Nabber, if I could just finish?
Sure, yeah.
Thanks. And then on the capacity issue, I mean, I understand looking at it again, but we have reports that shows that our COLA is 60% efficient. So that's kind of a known already, and we can look at capacity, but that's kind of a given. And then I guess on the design service, I'm still confused by what we're asking a design firm to do. Is it the new building? Because if it's the 14 million repair option, we know what that is. We have facility studies, we looked at it a couple times. I'm just going to understand what's being designed and what we're asking them to do in that RFP. And then just my last question was, if you could just elaborate on what's the debt and funding analysis, what the thinking is on the assumptions going into that. Like, what are the kind of options that are going to be part of that analysis that'll be done next month?
In terms of the debt and funding analysis, I mean, it's certainly, while I don't have all the details to share with you this evening, I can tell you that, going into doing any renovation and/or new construction, we're going to need to have that conversation so it's clear how, whatever money we decide to spend, we're going to be able to pay for and how that will fit into our overall debt structure. So we would likely include PFM in that conversation. We would likely have Mr. Bricker in on that conversation and be able to present to the board the entire picture of what we would be doing in terms of our budgets, how would it impact the long-term debt, and what might the taking on whatever amount of debt it is, whether it's renovation debt or new construction debt, how that might impact our ability to complete other projects as part of the overall facilities assessment plan. So I think there's a number of things that need to be discussed there, and that may not be all inclusive in this conversation.
So it's primarily, it's either essentially roughly the 14 million to repair or the 25 to build.
Right, I think that's unless someone come back and tell us, well, it's really 12 million and 30, or some kind of other number.
But it's those are the two main things.
Well, I think that's really the options that have been on the table. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we end with. In fact,
I heard full-day kindergarten here as well, and we know there's.
We can't fund that under the debt service.
I understand, but debt and funding analysis, you got to think about not only the debt funding, but operational funding as well. So I don't know if that was encompassed in there or not.
No, that's a good point. I think there was another question of yours.
Just any further clarification you give on the design services as far as what's being designed?
So again, I can tell you that having anyone here that is going to help us and guide us through a decision-making process who are considered professional. I mean, I'm not a professional school renovation or construction person. While I have thoughts about what questions we need to answer, I'm going to make the assumption that people that do this for a living have a pretty good idea how to bring people together, ask the types of questions that get to the root of what we really want from the renovation. Now, some of the renovation, as you know, includes things with carpeting, with roofs, some of the major systems, but also some of the cosmetic systems as well. So when we look at doing that, if we hear from the public and the board as part of the goal setting that, we also want to be able to deal with full-day kindergarten, I don't know if we can actually fit full-day kindergarten in Arrowhead the way it's currently structured, and certainly not with the modulars that exist. So the questions, all these things about where we are with goals, what options we want to consider, the funding that we're able to afford, and how programmatically we want to deal with this is all a part of what the design professionals will gather in order to say, these are the things that you are looking to do as part of this project. So instead of maybe $14 million and fixing all the stuff that's in the facilities assessment, it might be $15 million and you get this other stuff that you wanted to get, or it might be $16 million and you get these other things that you want to accomplish. So the truth, when we start getting to these larger numbers, we want to make sure that we just don't put money in it and it's just what it is today, if we know in the future we're going to need something else. And we're going to need to be able to provide a library that is similar to the other libraries in the district, or we're going to be able to provide a gym or other instructional space like for full-day kindergarten. So they're going to help us put all this together, and they're going to help us, come back to you and say, these are the options, and these are the costs associated with those options. And for you, rather than relying on me or for Davia to give you that information. And they'll have schematics associated with the discussions that occurred and the options that are available. So I hope that's a better explanation, but I don't know how I don't know how to do this without them, to be honest with you.
Sorry, I don't want to belabor, but Brian, it was something, I don't know if this is your same question, but I kind of asked something similar last night, like, does this exist, and are we going crazy, and Dan had mentioned, just so you know, I was like, is there really a firm out there that can do this and make it cost effective? We're not hiring two different. And he said, oh yeah. And he's like, there's about 11 to 13. I would say narrow it down to 6, interview 3, and that there is so help us make this kind of decision, because we need that. And sorry for the colors, but it was almost like we need this design service in the pink before we do some of in the white down here. And I asked the same question, because I was like, but there's no way we can make this decision with just a little bit of information about money and what's in the facility study.
Any other comments on the timeline from my left? Anyone else from the right? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to reiterate that, for anyone who's looking at this document or watching this meeting, we do have designated places where we are actively seeking input, but I don't want anyone to think that that's the only time that we're seeking input. I would love for this to be a very combined process. I want this to involve the community. I want to involve our staff. I want to hear from everyone who has a stake in this, everyone who's part of our Methacton community. So while we will be actively seeking input, please, if you have ideas or thoughts on this, we welcome them at any time.
Thank you. So if there's Mr. Winters?
Sorry, I almost swallowed it, but I'm just going to say, the one other element, I think I did mention this at one time, is the Farina building. I think the Farina building is another variable in this process, because the Farina building, we don't talk about the costs associated with that on the facility study. We haven't talked about it. It's 50-some years old. It's got the same sort of requirements that Arrowhead has, I imagine. So if there's going to be a decision to do something with the Farina, if there is space to do that also within Skyview or Arcola or wherever, that should also be a part of the consideration, in my opinion.
And that's a good point. So it's stuff like that, and that will come up as part of the larger conversation that will eventually get narrowed down into the buckets of options that are available to us. And I think it's your input as well as input from the community that will help drive those conversations. So I'm not necessarily going to jot that down, but you're right. You're right in terms of there's a number of things that we need to consider in the scheme of this, and that's an excellent point. So if there's no other comments, I'm going to take the suggestions here. I'm going to turn this from a draft into a kind of call it a final document. I'll work with Amanda Kelly to create a page on the district website that's prominent enough for everyone to see, and we'll start as we go through this process. We'll start dumping all the information that we have associated with that into that area of the website. Is everybody good with that? All right. Thank you very much. Then if we go on to the next, to the agenda, then for next week, we have staff recognition. We have a check presentation from the Education Foundation. Dr. Cesanovic will be back with us for a 3-year technology plan update. And we have from Ms. Ricky an elementary library project, and that elementary library project is an update from a grant that is being targeted from the foundation to support the elementary libraries. Then we will go on to reports from the committee boards. As you can see, there's some advisements or trips there. We'll have public comment on board action items, approval of the minutes, and then we get to fiscal items. We have Mr. Berger here. You want to address those?
Sure. For this month, we're going to have the list of bills, treasurer's report, budgetary transfers. We're also going to be having the MCIU budget, and we'll be asking the board to approve the MCIU membership services budget for 1920. And this will be a cost of $73,171, which is an actual decrease from the prior year of $1,099. We'll also be asking for the approval of the surveillance system previously noted tonight by Dr. Cesanovic and the master plan projects. And finally, we'll be asking for the recommendations to be approved with regards to the student activity accounts.
So before we go on to asking questions, and we will be updating number F5 based on our conversation this evening. Are there any comments on any of the other items under fiscal? If not, what we want to do is, if you see under student activity accounts, I think Mr. Bricker had shared out what the changes will be, and do we have copies of those, or did? So just to give you a little history on this conversation, we had brought before the, I believe, Finance Committee meeting the changes about a month or so ago.
So in January, we brought some recommendations with regards to student activity accounts, most of them being ones that were inactive based on the transactions that were occurring. This includes both the Arcola and the high school student activity accounts. And going through the January Finance Committee meeting, it was requested that we go back, find more information, really dig in with the sponsors, make sure how they want to proceed with these. We did that. That information was gathered. You'll see the recommendations that come from the sponsors and/or the principals associated with these accounts and how they manage it. And these recommendations have been signed off by the sponsors. So with the Arcola, there's accounts that are being closed, and those are the ones that are being based on the principal. They're inactive accounts that no one is using these student activity accounts anymore. Those funds will be moved into the Arcola student leadership account. With the high school, and with Arcola, we're also going to be asking you to approve the active accounts that are going to remain open, just more of a housekeeping item, just to make sure that the board is aware of them and they are approving those student activity accounts. And then on the last page, you'll see the recommendations for the high school student activity accounts. I think we have 15 accounts that we're going to be closing per the sponsors. There's 4 or 5 accounts that will be closed that do not have sponsors, and those funds will be moved to different areas, or they're negative accounts, and we'll be funding those accounts. Then you'll have 4 accounts that are going to remain open until the end of April 2019. That'll give the sponsors time to spend the money in those accounts, at which time after that in May we'll be bringing them back for closure. And then you have 6 accounts that'll be staying open. Also, in some of the recommendations, you'll notice that the sponsors are requesting for the renaming of some of their student activity accounts.
So in general, the motion that will be written in here will be, with the attachment, will be a recommendation for approval to keep, to recognize the accounts that will remain open, and also then to recognize the accounts that we're recommending for closure. And that will, be articulated on the agenda. Any questions on any of the items under fiscal? Yeah, Mr. Ryan.
Just 2 questions regarding the activity account information here. I just want to make sure, so all the sponsors that are now listed on this sheet are the current sponsors, and that's been confirmed?
Yes, that was provided to me by Dr. Speedway.
Okay. And number 2, how does a activity account have a negative balance and maintain a negative balance?
So they can't any longer. However, these are older accounts, and that is the way that they were left by someone who might be my predecessor. I couldn't answer why because I was not here, but we do have a policy that the only student activity account that can go negative is the play account, and that's because of the timing of when they get their proceeds for when they have to buy all the sets.
So moving forward, we will have the policy in place that will not be possible?
That's already in place, yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions on finance? Mr. Earnshaw?
Just a question on the student activity accounts. Like some of these balances that are as of January 14th for accounts that are going to be closed at the high school went to zero within 2 weeks. Does that mean that the sponsors spent the money on activity-related items or matters, or?
So when the sponsors found out they had the accounts, they either moved it into other accounts that they're currently using that are associated with those programs, such as the Spanish Interactive Club would move to the Spanish Club. I'm just using that as an example without looking through it. So the sponsors made their decisions as to where to move those funds. And they have that right and control. It's not something that we have control over. With regards to the high school powder puff, that was a little different. That's not active, so we talked to Dr. Sergini, and he wanted that moved into student council funds. Some of the ones without sponsors, such as the Angel Network, which is the biggest one that everyone see, that was moved to the Minithon based on Dr. Sergini's recommendation. It's a cancer fund that went to a cancer cause. So none of the decisions to move the money were made without a sponsor or the principal's approval.
Okay, so it's not that it was spent, it just got moved, chances are it got moved to another account. That's going to remain.
For the most part, it got moved to an active account.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Navarrete?
Yeah, so I know we beat this to death pretty hard in finance, and we certainly had, I'd say, 3 unhappy board members with the fact that we had $30,000 of unspent funds that were just sitting there. And I know you talked in finance about the fact that you've got a reminder set on your calendar to now review this every year. But I guess, can you, either you or Dr. Zerbe, speak to where ultimate responsibility lies for, 1, monitoring these accounts to know that they're either active, or 2, that the expenditures are legitimate?
Well, the legitimacy of the expenditures is done through a process whereby the sponsor, the adult, and the student officers would sign off on the request for purchases. So, and then that information comes up to the business office and is processed like any other purchase order would normally do. So that's pretty much been, in place, and we're confident that that works well. And that's the way the rules are associated with those counts. In terms of the overall responsibility, certainly it is my responsibility to oversee the operation of the district, but it's a combination of a number of things, and I think as part of our review of job descriptions and as part of our review of this particular matter, as well as a number of other matters that have come up probably in the last year or so, we're looking at revising the job descriptions to make it much more clear about whose responsibilities it is to work with the business office, because it's not solely the business office that has to monitor and manage these types of things, because they don't necessarily work with the actual programs and activities. So there's a shared responsibility, and we need to update the job descriptions to properly reflect that. But yes, I mean, most of these activities are in the high school. You would then assume that the athletic director or activities person, as well as high school principal, are generally the people that oversee these things and make sure that they're in proper order with the central office, business office.
Yeah, I appreciate your effort to say the buck stops with you, but I could also say if the floor isn't clean in a classroom, then it could be your fault too. I mean, that's fine. But realistically, this needs to be handled at the level below you, and it hasn't been. And I'm glad you brought this to everybody's attention, but this is a big miss, in my opinion. I'm glad we're cleaning it up.
We're glad we're cleaning it up too, and that's what I mean by the job description. We got to get the job description. We got to make sure that people are clearly notified about what their responsibilities are, and then address it appropriately.
So to piggyback on that question, then, as a board, what is our responsibility when we look at these accounts? I know we're voting on it, but yearly, do we look at it beginning of the year and at the end of the year?
So from what I'm going to be doing, just so you can understand what the business office is doing, at the end of the year, the main reason, and that's the annual look that Mr. Navarrete mentioned, is to make sure that the student class account gets closed out and done before the end of the year, because once they depart, there's no one there to make any decisions associated with it. The beginning of each year, I'm going to be working with Dr. Spiewak to update the student signers so that all that information is available to my staff so that we can cross-reference that when we get the purchase orders that come in. With regards to who is responsible with the board, these are student activity accounts, and when you approve a club, they can have the right to ask for or request a student activity account, which you then can approve or deny. What should happen in an ideal situation such as this is when a sponsor departs or a sponsor or a club ends, that part of closing that out would also include closing out the student activity accounts. And I think that's...
Which would also require board action.
Yes, that requires the board action too.
This is a minuscule question. I was looking at this, and I forget who had the question about a negative balance, and that made sense about the plays. I see the golf team here went from 376 to negative 43.
That's a deposit that, without getting technically, there's a deposit issue. It's being rectified.
Okay, that's fine.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So you explained how an account that was inactive with a balance on January 14th that had a positive balance might have gone to, like, why that went to zero on January 28th, because they transferred the money into another account. But how did that work with balances that were in the negative?
So those funds were covered by different student activity accounts based on sponsors that no longer needed the accounts and were willing to cover that, and I worked with Dr. Sergini with that.
So it was all covered within the same process?
Yes. We had about a 2-hour meeting going over this, over which items should be moved and who should cover it and how it should be handled. And so none of this was done lightly.
No, I really was just wondering about the process. So it was done similarly as to how the positive balances were allocated. The negatives were also taken care of that way?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then on to personnel items. Mr. Regina.
Thank you. We have 2 items for the board's consideration for professional employment. One of them is a new position, and it's from the established position from last month, and one is an extension of the TOA assignment for the Nicole Starson at Arcola. We have 3 items for classified employment. One of those is a new position for additional support services needed for the bus. 2 are replacement positions. We have 3 items for classified change of status. We have 1 item for professional uncompensated leave and 7 items for classified uncompensated leave. We have 3 items for supplemental contracts, 3 items for classified substitute, and 1 item for volunteers.
Any questions?
Yes. We've discussed this before, and I don't know how to fix it. We don't need a personnel committee. We need to add another committee. But I feel like some of these positions do need to be discussed at some point, like the Nicole Starson position. And that might be just a way of communicating, like whether it's the administrators at Arcola need to talk to you, who need to talk to Mary. I don't know where we draw the line as to what has to be spoken about in education. I understood the addition of the special ed instructor, and you might have mentioned it in our memo. Makes sense to me that there's more students, we need another teacher. But that, at some point, it's like even with the staffing, with the, when you brought it up at budget, when we talked about it at budget and then we talked about it, I feel like I would like to know when and where that should be discussed. Sometimes I know they're sensitive issues, but I'm not talking about this at the work session. Okay, so, I'd like to know about this. From what I understand, Ms. Starson is doing a lot with data. Now, I hate the word data, but if I could, I just don't like it. I know it's important, but I wish I would have, if this is the time, I would like to discuss it.
So maybe it's important, Mr. Regina, maybe you can take us back historically through this particular position.
Yeah, so the Starson position initially started with, I knew there was some scheduling conversation that existed at the Arcola level. And some of that conversation was around getting staff input, collecting data from other districts, and being able to kind of consolidate that into a format to present to the administration. So we had met with that staff, with both Nicole and then both Jerry and Amy at the Arcola level. And some of the feedback that came from administration was there was some more work that needed to be done on that. So they had asked for additional time for Nicole Starson to be able to move to the TOA position.
And I remember that, and it makes sense. And, you know, I'm glad Ms. Starson gets this opportunity. But here's a phenomenal special education teacher out of her room, which is good for her. But, you know, we have two principals. We have a mental health program that now is one of the parts of that was to take some, you know, free up some time for administrators. I know, I would assume this role kind of helps because we have just one director of curriculum. I would prefer in the future for something like this to be discussed more, because it's a lot of moving things, and I always am in the first one to trust our I'm the first one to say, yeah, you need it. It makes sense. But it's a little concerning to me that it's a big, not a big role, but you know, I don't know. I don't like to see it on an agenda. I don't know how to fix that.
Well, I think the challenge here is, we originally had the conversation back in probably October or November. I can't recall exactly, but we made the recommendation that we would pull Ms. Starson from her regular assignment into this role to assist the principal and assistant principal in a project for addressing scheduling at Arcola. We then came back to you probably in January asking you for the extension, and that was probably till the end of February, I imagine. And after we met with them, as Mr. Regina had shared, I mean, our intention wasn't to have her on as long as we have it. You know, the goal was by the end of January, Arcola team would have a set of deliverables that I could take and then move forward for your consideration. We're not there yet, and there's a lot of challenging pieces with scheduling that intertwine with the existing staff contract, as well as what we believe educationally needs to be done in order to take Arcola to the next level. So with that said, a lot of our conversations, you know, while they're at the point where they have the right ideas, the pieces aren't organized for me to give them to you because there's a lot of interplaying parts. So we're asking for you to extend her time so that she can work with the remaining teachers and free up time for both the principal and the assistant principal to be a part of this process too, so that we can get this thing done and I can present to you the options that we need to consider for the schedule. If you choose not to approve her, that's fine as well. I'm not certain, how much that will delay us in the scheduling, but I can certainly find that out. And but ultimately, we need to come up with a plan for the schedule next year, because under the contract, we have a requirement to deal with it.
So my only, just to piggyback with her, is I agree. I don't think we need to discuss it in education, but I think we do a status update just saying this position, we haven't made an agreement yet. We're still discussing scheduling. We'd like to bring it forward for approval for an extension, and that just at least being a touch base in the education, because it is education based. We don't have to have a full discussion because clearly it is more involved, but just to kind of come to us first, then to work session, and then to do the vote. That's
Understood. I think that's
Or
what you're... I think
or
that's
the
what-
memo, or
yeah,
something.
yeah. It's caught, in all disclosure, it got caught up in, and so it didn't get to me until where we are. So, and we didn't intend to have her extended.
And is this contract related?
No, this is not.
Okay.
No. This is a matter of, we held a meeting. By the time the meeting was over and we looked at what the rest of the timeline is going to be, it didn't get into a memo, and it certainly didn't get into, the Education Committee meeting. So, I apologize for that, but that's the truth.
Just real quick, the semi-related item here, and I had a brief discussion with Mr. Regina about this, that I think that a lot of the personnel stuff kind of leads to the idea that we need a living document that's an HR staffing report type document. We see things kind of on a bulleted list here of, there's 5 items here, there's 7 items here, who's this person replacing? We always talk about the domino effect. And I think it would be helpful if we just had that document created that, if someone's replacing this person, that person gets added to the document right below. There's a note section, if they're extended for a certain period of time. And I agree with Andrea's point that I don't think that there's any need for an additional committee, but I think it really does help to connect the dots from meeting to meeting and to really follow this through so that we know who's sitting in this position for how long, who's on a leave of absence, that type of thing. So I just want to bring that up now since we're kind of in that same type of discussion to see, what the board's kind of will is amongst that. And, I don't want to dump another project on Mr. Regina being new to this, but I think that that's an important thing, and that could be on our shared doc site where we could go in and look if we had a question about it. So.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly what Mr. Regina has suggested to do. He just doesn't have that together yet for you guys. So he's already come forward with that suggestion, because while it might be confusing for you, you imagine he still doesn't know all the people, and and so that's that's part of it. So you can expect to see something like that, as soon as we can get that organized and put together for you.
And just to add to what Mike said, and we ran into an issue last year where, people were concerned about, positions being filled at the high school because they are very specific. So in that document, whatever you want to call it, how many STS employees are long-term, and then we discussed having them on an observation. I'm not saying as formal of an observation as, our MEA staff, but, it was mentioned that they're really not part of a formal observation. Best practice, of course, is the principal goes in there, of course, but, I would just, I would like some, if we've got a person there that's an employee for 180 days, I want to know that they're being, observed, not even just to check what they're doing, like not as a check of also what they're doing, but for fairness to them, because I know there's been some STS employees that have been phenomenal, and maybe no one knew they were phenomenal. Maybe one building administrator knew they were phenomenal, I want, if they're going to be part of our staff, I want them to.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments for Mr. Regina on personnel?
Yeah, I'll just agree wholeheartedly with everything that Andrea had to say, because I had the exact same questions, because we approved this back in November, and then it was approved. We extended it through the February 1st, and now we're coming in February 19th to approve this in arrears. So we're putting the board in a tough spot because we missed this in January. Before I'm going to vote for this, I need to see more about what the actual deliverables are going to be that are going to come out of this, because the way it was pitched to us earlier was, certainly a shorter term deal. So here's, we've got a teacher that's been working full time on this for, what, two months now, 3 months, and we don't have it yet. So I'd like some more information on what the deliverables are before we're going to get my vote. Adding on to what Mike said too about, whether we need a living document, I think since we're having this discussion, I think the personnel information that's provided in the agenda is simply short. I don't think the text cuts it. I think we've got to have more information. And it gets to some of the stuff that's later on where we talk about some of the leaves and we're moving some people around from different positions. I think we've got to really understand too what the costs are of each of these moves. Now we put a salary or we put an hourly rate in here, but we need to understand, if this is a replacement position, what was the rate before, or what was the salary before, who we're replacing it with, in a circumstance like this with a teacher on assignment, for what's the duration of the term, and how much is that going to cost us? What's going to be the net financial impact? So if somebody's going to take an uncompensated leave, if we're going to take a salary of $75,000 off the book, we're going to fill it with an STS, with a short-term sub. Those things are important. I know you and I had a conversation before about when Carthage left, and we saw it on PB's agenda. And quite frankly, I think Perk Valley does a pretty good job of putting that information out there on the agenda. It just increases the level of transparency, makes the decision-making process easier for us. The only other question I had was in item I, around these uncompensated leaves. Are these positions being backfilled with any kind of help, or are they just sitting empty while these folks are out?
It's sometimes it's dependent upon the position, but typically they're filled, if they're the classified, they're filled with casuals. And they're mixed sometimes, Ralph. They could be medically driven, they could be leave driven.
Any other questions or comments on personnel? If not, thank you for your comments and input. Curriculum and programs, no items under policy. There are a number of first reading policies. They are 006 meetings, 114 gifted education, 214 class rank, 350 criminal charges or convictions, 351 drug and substance abuse, and 913 non-school organization groups or individuals. And then for your consideration next week, the two policies for second reading are political activities 321 and policy 818.1 contracted services personnel. I think it's probably appropriate for me to make sure that the board understands that for a long period of time, policy 214 class rank was on the discussion table for the Education Committee. And what I mean by that is, we're talking policy, but it's education. It started with the Education Committee about whether or not class rank and the way that we reported on college transcripts should be, considered, removed. And as part of our policy, it so dictates that we do put it on college transcripts. So. It was shared with the Education Committee about a month ago that the work that Dr. Sergini did, along with Dr. Catona, was conduct a review of class rank. And generally speaking, if you have your pads in front of you, the class rank presentation is posted there. And I'm just going to go through some of the highlights for your consideration. But understand that class rank was established policy 214. Basically, it computes the final grade. Class rank is reported on student records and included in the transcript, and the overall GPA average determines the overall rank. And we use this to determine the valedictorian and salutatorian of the class. The rationale for investigating the class rank, we heard for a number of years that class rank promotes aggressive competition among students. It encourages students to take classes that will positively impact their class rank versus ones that are more interest to them. When class rank can negatively impact a student's overall college application. And so what that means is, and I'm not necessarily reading from the script here, but it means that students that are in in Methacton High School that are in the, getting, a 90% average or a 99% average and don't happen to fall in the top 5% of the graduating class are sometimes looked at with their class rank, and it hurts them to get into some of the colleges of choice. And so with that, if we slide to some of the other slides, these are a list of some of the other school districts: Perkiomen Valley, Wissahickon, Springfield, Upper Marion, and the list is there before you of schools that have removed class rank from the transcripts. And basically, Dr. Sergini and his team went ahead and analyzed the top 20 schools that Methacton students applied to, including the top 3 Ivy League schools. And this survey represented the colleges and universities who visit Methacton, and overwhelmingly, most either do not utilize class rank in determining college acceptance, or will only use the school report if the school reports the rank on the transcript. Another comment was most schools focus on GPA as the criteria, and most reported that not including class rank will not negatively impact the likelihood of a Methacton student being accepted into a college or university. Dr. Sergini also included a list of some of the top universities that our students apply to, and those that will accept or will use class rank if provided. The feedback from students: there was a survey done to students, to staff, to parents in the community, and surveys distributed to all students in grades 9 through 12 and to all parents of students in grades 7 through 12 and all teaching staff at Arcola and Methacton High School. 353 student responses, 413 parent responses, and 102 teacher responses, and meetings held with the class officers of the class of 2019 through 2022 indicated from the feedback, and the results of the survey are there, and the questions are generally, as a student, parent, staff member, is how important is class rank to you? And it is overwhelming that that all students, parents, and staff recognize that it gave it a 1. 45%, 49%, 67% recognize it as very unimportant. And only those that, about 9%, 20%, and less than 6% thought it was very important in the respective groups. And it goes on to some of the other questions, and they're generally of the same nature. But generally speaking, what had come out of this whole study, and the guidance department at the high school was involved in this, as well as other administrators, that class rank, when reported on the transcript, has the potential to negatively impact the high-achieving students during the college and university application process. 2, class rank has been eliminated by many of the surrounding school districts similar to Methacton. 3, the majority of colleges and universities with whom Methacton has contacted do not require class rank for the application process. 4, survey results of stakeholders that responded show that a majority of those students, parents, and staff and members responded to the affirmative when asked if class rank should be eliminated from the transcript. And lastly, class officers, many of whom represent some of the highest academic achieving students at Methacton High School, responded in the affirmative when asked if class rank should be eliminated from the transcript. So the recommendation from Dr. Sergini to the Education Committee was to remove class rank from transcripts starting next school year. And I will say that that wasn't his original recommendation, but his recommendation was to phase it in. I think there was enough conversation at the table in the Education Committee, and he agreed that the phase-in was a nice approach to dealing with it, whereas it made most sense to just peel off the Band-Aid and address it. So that was the recommendation from him. He updated his presentation. It's before you. I shared that recommendation with the policy committee. We reviewed the policy. The policy is online for first read, and that should summarize the matter of class rank for the board's consideration. I'm sorry for being long-winded on that, but I wanted to make sure that everyone on the board understood that it was a long process involving multiple committees and a lot of people in the community. And so I want to thank Dr. Katona, Dr. Zergini, his team, and the patience of the Education Committee and the Policy Committee for their work on this. So questions on any of the policies in their first read or second read? Mr. Ryan?
First, I want to say thank you, Dave, for taking the time to actually go through that. This was kind of an odd process in terms of, a big decision like this kind of making its way through education, then kind of becoming a policy matter. We're really voting on this as approving a policy. So I appreciate the fact that we did this. I like the process that we used, the surveys going out to the community, to the staff. I do think it's important that this will sit out there for a month under first read, then will be voted on next month. If approved, I think it would be a good idea to do some type of press release or community release, because people know that the survey was out there. Well, at least half the district does. Those with younger students don't necessarily get that kind of survey information, but I think that this is one of those decisions that if the board makes that, we really should put this out to the community. I mean, we're certainly not the last to do this, but we're not the first, and I think that this is a good move for us. So if we approve this, kind of the rationale of what happened, what it will mean moving forward, that type of stuff. Even a link to the full presentation. I mean, I always think that more information is better than not enough information. And, if someone's got a fourth grader or a fifth grader now, like, wait, we don't do class rank anymore by the time they get there. It's like, oh, wait, I remember back reading something there. So.
It's likely going to also be included in the student handbook as well. So yeah, there's some updates with that, and so it'll certainly be a good idea to publicize this in advance of a change in the handbook, so people know what's coming.
Okay, great. Yeah. So like I said, thank you very much. I think this is probably 3 years in the making. I think we sat in a policy committee meeting when a member of the public brought this up first, and also brought it up at the education committee. So this is kind of one of those things that it's nice to finally come to a conclusion on. So thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing that Mike said. But I think it's important to link the presentation, because there might be some people out there. I mean, I was an educator, and a few years ago I said, oh, come on, that's how it used to be. I think some people may not be aware of that so many don't do it anymore. So I would just caution just putting a short statement. I would link it to maybe the presentation, but it's just up to you. But I would reiterate that, because even myself as an educator, I was like 2 years ago, like, what? Come on, that's how it was when I was a kid, but things are different. And then the only thing I wanted to say, and I wanted to point it out to our and I forget if it's Mike or Paul, our legislative or our IU person. I was reading through the gifted education policy, and that just always very interesting to me that it's first of all, gifted education is extremely important, but that we have a policy about it, that it's mandated, but that it's not funded by our government. So just FYI, people don't realize there's a lot of things that we have to do that are not funded, and it's, as a board member, it's, we gotta lean on this legislation here to help us a little bit more. And
so while we're on my left, anyone else on my left? Mr. Anshaw? So
regarding class rank, it'll still be tracked. If a college requires it and asks for it, the district will still be able to provide it to that college.
The policy, as it's revised, for your consideration, allows for that to occur. So that if needed for a student application, they can make a request.
Okay. And then just thinking forward to like graduation, I know the top 10% were always recognized at graduation. I recall that from my kids.
Well, there are some. Again, that's not by policy. So right, those things are being considered about how we deal with who speaks, what things we all that type of stuff. So that generally is at the purview of the high school principal. So while he'll consult with me on that, it's not necessarily something that we have a policy on. But I believe it has been changing over a number of years. In fact, it was about 2 or 3 years ago that we added the voice of the class. So having the student body select who speaks at graduation seems to resound better with the graduates than maybe a process where the highest GPA speaker instead of having them speak. So there hasn't been any determination yet. We'll certainly, what we're doing this coming graduation will be similar to last graduation. So there's no recommended change if this policy is approved. But if we are going to change anything, we will, make that known well in advance and certainly apprise the board as well. Any other questions to my left? If not, to my right. All right, thank you for listening to that. And then on to the next items under other, we have gifts, donations, sponsorships. There's a gift for a recumbent exercise bike, heavy bag, and 2 sets of boxing gloves. What are we doing with boxing gloves? Is that? Oh, okay, all right. So we are for a sensory perception room at Skyview Upper Elementary School, a gift of $300. We accept a gift of 2 of the following: American POWMI flags, poles, stands, and spears, for prisoner of the war missing in action, Forget-Me-Nots Incorporated, for Arcola Intermediate School, value of $184.12. Accept an agreement of sponsorship between Scott Dorn of Audubon, PA, and Greg Pelicano of Eagleville, PA, donors, and the Methacton School District as attached. So on here, there should be an exhibit and an agreement for your review for a donation of $15,000 for a sign on the dugout. So on there, I put in front of you in case you have any concerns or questions about that. There should be a picture of the sign for the dugout. And I had a copy over here and I don't know what I do with it. But I think what's also important with this is that we have, as a result of all the fundraising that we did, this one, and there's one other, we'll call it a donor bench that still is outstanding, that needs to be formally adopted. And the reason these things sat was because it wasn't until August that we got the okay to put these things in place. And then, as we started moving to get this thing organized, my right-hand person, decided to leave for another position elsewhere. So it kind of sat until I was able to kind of get this back and organized. Now, the other part of this whole signage matter is that as we shared with the property committee many months ago, is that we've organized this brochure to allow for the students in the clubs, in band, in the sports programs to sell where approved and designated approval areas for signage. If they were to sell a signage for, say, a chiropractic firm for the use on the JV softball fence, that sign would be at a cost of, let's say, it's $500 for 3 years. The softball team, if they're the ones that sell it, would be able to get, I think, $75 or $100. So I have that scale. That was all showed out, and we're in the process of finalizing that brochure and getting ready for the start of this spring season, so that students can go ahead and utilize this as a fundraiser. But at the same time, it's a fundraiser for the district. And it's also a great opportunity for us to get these revenue streams in place. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of this in the near future. What else do we have on gifts? So we accept a gift from North Acton Education Foundation to be used in fulfillment of a grant for the science department, third grade coding, gift of $9,500. And then there's a number of trips listed on the agenda. We have the school calendar, and we have the approval of the unified sports program. So I know there might be questions on a number of these things, but I just want to pull up the school calendar, just say a few things about that. I put a copy of that at your place setting. The school calendar reflects a similar calendar look, as well as the dates associated with this current school year. So as you'll notice, in March, one of the major changes from historically, we're moving away from taking the first snow days out of the we'll call it the spring holiday, or some might call it prior to the Easter holiday, and we move those to March. This follows the same process. It has student conferences at the lower levels, K through 8, in November. We have school starting on the 28th. With students, so we'll have 2 in-service days. A student start on the 28th, we'll go to school on the 29th, we have off on the 30th and the 2nd. We recognize some of the general holidays that we have here. So, and we are now similar to this year, except for my call this evening, we would have last day of school on a Friday, but now that is on a Monday, as of an hour or two ago. So questions on any of the items, including the calendar? Mr. Winters?
Just on the calendar, so one, I think it's good that we're building in like we did in March this year, so I appreciate that. I also appreciate not putting December 23rd as a school day, as we have sometimes in the past. Just try to squeeze another day before the holiday, which makes sense. The only one I do not understand is the April 27th. Is that correct? Well, we have Good Friday on the 24th, I think.
April 27th?
Yeah.
April 27th?
Yeah, okay, yeah, but April 27th is a school day, April 28th, Tuesday is not.
That's the elections, the election day. Midterms for the,
It moves up a month because of the presidential.
Oh, it's the election day. So does it make sense actually to have school on the 27th? I'm just questioning that when you have off on the 24th, come back for a Monday, and then, so, and...
We need to have the 24th off.
Okay. Okay, that's it. No, it doesn't read that way, but okay.
Mr. Winters, if you look at the notes, I just saw it myself. The 24th is no school for the high school. The 28th is just K to 4.
Okay.
So if we're not impacting the same students.
I understand now. Thank you.
So the issue on this is there's 2 sides, and the explanation is usually on the back. We tried to limit the number of colors. We tried to limit the number of colors so that we could at least, at a glance, let parents know that, there's no school on particular days. So this was what was thought to be a better representation than what we've had. But does that solve your concern? Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions on any of the other items under gift donations and/or the calendar?
Yeah, just on the calendar. Maybe it's worth putting that the 28th is election day, since we did start doing that this year. We were going to give that off. It's probably worth noting on that on there.
So we'll do November 5th and the 28th as election days, right?
Yeah, I just think it's worth
Okay.
noting.
Okay.
That's why we're taking those
Just
days
bear
off.
with me one
K
second.
before. And I guess I made this comment this year when we did this too. It seems silly to me that we're scheduling days off on random days in March that we know we're going to have school anyway, because we know we have usually 2 or 3 school days, snow days every year. I don't understand why we don't just schedule them as days. we'll have, 2 extra days built into the calendar that then we could just give people back at the end of the year, if by some miraculous chance we don't use them, whether it's 2 days, whether it's 3 days, whether it's 4 days. Those days, those random days off, create problems for parents in terms of daycare and what am I doing with my kids on those days. My preference would see us go to if there's 180 days, and I know there's not, but there's 180 days, we schedule in 182 or 183 or 184. And then at the end of the year, we just give them back and, hey, guess what? Instead of getting out on the 16th, we're going to get out on the 12th, and everybody enjoy your summer. You're getting 3 days off. And we can announce that at the same time as everything else.
I don't think we can do it.
My 2 cents, but.
No, I appreciate the comments. We believe that this still is a matter in the contract. So as it reads, and I don't have it in front of me, it says 1 or 2 days, and so we moved the 1 or 2 days from the 1 or 2 days before Easter to these 1 or 2 days. And we would need to have 1 or 2 days. We could put the 1 or 2 days at the end of the year. That would probably suffice as your issue, but.
Can I? The contract, I believe, reads that the first 1 or 2 snow makeup days will be from regularly previously scheduled holidays. So what we're doing in March is we're making them the holidays instead of making the regularly scheduled holidays be spring break. So that is preserving spring break by adding in these March holidays, and that is how the contract is worded.
I'm glad I'm legally not part of negotiations.
Any other calendar comments? Now, we have a week, we may have, and just so you know, this was shared with, as per our Methacton Education Association contract. It is my responsibility to share this with them, so they did see that. We had, 1 or 2 other, minor suggestions, and we came to the conclusion that together this was the best scenario, and one that is similar to what we have today, other than just, dates have changed a little bit because of the new year. But you have a whole week to look at this. If there's any other issues or additions, if you get them to me in advance, I'd like to be able to, consider them and have them ready for the agenda and approval. My goal would be to hopefully have this schedule adopted for soon. And then the only other scheduling thing that I think, is typically for us, by the end of March, we'll be coming to you with setting the graduation date and those types of things. Hopefully, all the snow is gone by that time, and we can sincerely do it. That's all I have for this evening, so I'll turn it over to the President.
So, Dave, one question on the signage agreement. So these funds were in fact received in 2017? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Berger, could you take a look and see if you could find how that was recorded, if it's in the general fund, if it got put to the capital campaign?
It's in the capital campaign.
Okay. Well, that's just inconsistent with how we accounted for the Conicelli sign, I believe.
I'll look into it.
But how did we account for the Conicelli sign?
I think it went to the general fund. That was kind of what the thinking was.
Well, again, we received the donation, and we didn't have the approval of the signs yet. So I don't know.
I'll have to look into.
Well, why would we put the Conicelli sign? Let us look into that.
Okay.
That doesn't make sense either.
All right. And then, do we have any information on the cost of the sign? Because the agreement says the district bears the cost.
$600 for manufacturing and installation.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question also about the sign. Is if a certain group sold the sign, like you were saying groups were getting credit or something for, if a certain group sold the sign, they would get something?
Yes.
Did a certain group sell this sign? Just wondering.
No, this is not, this was only, well, when I say a group, it would be there was a capital campaign fundraising committee, not a student group, right. So that hasn't been released yet, but that will be released shortly.
All right. Next week, I assume we'll have some dates for our board member calendars. Is there anything that we need to discuss under old business or new business this evening? All right. Seeing none, I will open it up to courtesy of the floor. Mr. Andrews.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Very productive working meeting this evening. Here I am again in opposition to Arrowhead fictions and emotions. I'm the bearer of facts and consideration for the entire community, not just one sending area. In agreement with other skilled and persistent seniors, I'm still hoping you turn on that mental thing called fiscal responsibility. The Zerbe chart for option A, now called 1, the current structure, has utilization over 90% at 2 schools now, expanding to 3 schools within the decade. Closing only 1 school was a short-term fix. The option also shows Arcola steady at 58% utilization. That's a poor use of a costly resource. Closer option A study shows K-12 utilization at 78%. Without Arrowhead, utilization rises to 84%, a better overall use of resources. For option C, or option 3, with K-4 at 4 schools, 6 to 8 at Arcola, and no Arrowhead, overall utilization is better at 82%. Again, better resource use. The above estimates are based upon high-side enrollment projections, and actuals may easily come in lower. I still maintain full-day kindergarten is unneeded and expensive, and our test scores, how can they improve any further with full-day kindergarten, which is aimed at socialization? Also, it's unaffordable, as our superintendent stated a few years ago. So overall, there is no objective need for Arrowhead, like M&M proposed. What I mean there is that M&M, one of their proposals was to close the 2 schools. We can avoid large costs and better deal with renovation costs at our other buildings, plus other services expansion desires, without spending money at Arrowhead. In a decade, our debt should be reduced, and if there is untimely enrollment growth or full-day kindergarten, we could then afford to a new school or that additional program. You intend to contract a plan and sketches for a new $25 million Arrowhead due this fall. I propose that you contract a parallel independent study of various configuration options for better utilization of Skyview, Arcola, and the high school, with fuller consideration of benefits and challenges. Of course, without Arrowhead, a good and needed study. Perhaps a sum of $40,000 should be allocated to each study. Also, contract a new enrollment study inclusive of actuals for this October 1. The study would obtain student details for homes bought this year at the courts at Brynwood and the reserve at Center Square, the 2 major approved home building projects. Then come November or so, you will, at last, have an adequate set of facts to reconsider your choices using that mental thing called your fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Dr. Malik.
Jim Malik, Worcester. Anybody who's serious about communication would never send a postcard to anybody. So I don't know who came up with that idea, but that's got to be reevaluated. Number 2, with regards to who's responsible for the student activity accounts, well, that's an easy one. The board. The board. And specifically, the head of the Finance Committee and the Finance Committee. Yeah. I mean, I guess you guys have been in charge here for 4 years. You know, to try to pass the buck to the underlings sounds to me to be somewhat pathetic. Now, at the last meeting, I handed the board documents like that, and then the clock got started 10 seconds before I got to speak. And the chair said, "You're taking up our time here, Ms. Larsenis." What did you mean by that? I was taking up your time. What did you mean by that exactly? Do you feel that the public comment is like a nuisance to the board? Is that the meaning of "I'm taking up your time"? Was that the meaning of the comment?
If you'd like me to respond now, it's going to cut into your time.
Okay. It just seems to me like maybe you feel we're wasting your time. That's what I got out of it. Now, what I handed you is the potential impact of the Arrowhead closure. Because we saw from Dr. Zerbe's show, the other document I gave you, option D, it says benefits, cost avoidance of $14 million. Where does that number come from? Because if you look here, it says the 5-year projected cost avoidance of 14.8, but there's a 10-year projected cost avoidance of $22 million. Well, what was he talking about exactly? Because $22 million over 10 years, if you look at his presentation, he presented 10 years of data, 10 years of enrollment data. So why didn't he use the 10-year projected cost avoidance of $22 million? Seems to me like we were being misled. I don't understand what the $14 million cost avoidance was when we have $22 million right here in your Milo and McBroom study. Can you explain it? Seems to me like we're being misled. Now, there is another option that you haven't been presented with. I call it option J. Option J means you add on to selective elementary schools and get rid of Arrowhead, and it takes care of all your over-enrollment at those schools, right? You save $22 million, and then you add on at those schools. Or you add modular classrooms and rent them at $25 grand. And you can save the district all that money. But that was never presented to you guys. My question is why? Can you explain that one? So you can't go forward until you have had all the options presented to you to go forward. So can you ask him why you didn't have all the options?
Thank you, Dr. Malik, and I gave you back your 10 seconds.
No, I was talking about...
You can have a seat now.
I was talking about last time.
Okay, you can have a seat.
So we're going right to have a seat.
Thank you.
Another abusive process.
Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Mr. Bickelman.
Joe Bickelman from Audubon. I'm going to speak to the most important thing. I don't think we should keep Arrowhead open. I think we should close Arrowhead. I think you ought to spend a lot of time looking at the 600 seats that are available at Arcola that only has 2 grades in it. It was built for 3. The 200 seats that are available at Skyview, okay? I think you should work a lot on getting those things more capacity, more efficiency, because Mr. Earnshaw said we're at 60%. John says we're at 58% for Arcola. So, you know, I swore throughout this whole process I wouldn't use the no-brainer thing or the end of the day or anything like that. But you have a big problem at Arcola. It's 58% utilized. 600 seats, 200 seats at Skyview, okay? You don't need to spend the money to renovate or rebuild. Here's what I found most upsetting last night at the facilities meeting. Okay, Mylona McBroom provided an enrollment update for Dr. Zerbe's report in the beginning of November. Okay? He was studying, it was for the studying the future of Arrowhead based on birth rate, housing development, things like that. Mr. Andrews and Dr. Malik found that there was faults with the figures for birth rates and for housing. Dr. Malik requested backup from M&M's updated report, maybe get a couple documents from some of the agencies that they would have derived their information from. So last night at the meeting, Dr. Malik said, because he didn't get anything from M&M, he said he would go to the agencies that should provide the documentation to M&M for their projections of housing and enrollment. He went to these agencies, and they didn't have anything from Mylona McBroom, and they said they didn't speak to Mylona McBroom since 2016, when the original report was done. So if I was a board member, I would get on the phone to Mylona McBroom, have them take a picture of the document they got from the Department of Health for enrollment and births, have them take a picture on their cell phone from Worcester Township and from Lower Providence Township and send it to you as board members and say, yeah, we contacted the townships and the Department of Health for birth. Here's the letter from them. And look at it as a board member, because what I got from Dr. Malik last night was that these agencies weren't contacted by M&M, or they didn't do any correspondence with M&M. Now you're going to say, well, maybe they got it from the website or something like that. No. M&M's a hotshot outfit in Connecticut. They're going to require documentation from these outfits. Dr. Malik said that they didn't speak to M&M since 2016. So maybe that's why the numbers were wrong. Mr. Ryan said we should have the architect available for Dr. Zerbe's questioning for Dr. Zerbe's schedule for the Arrowhead and where we're going with Arrowhead. Right, Mr. Ryan? You said that the architect should be available so we can bounce questions off him. Mylona McBroom, the district's consultant, was not at Dr. Zerbe's presentation or the promised presentation by M&M later on that month so that we can bounce questions off him. They weren't there. So I, as individual board members, I wouldn't get caught in this, because if there isn't any correspondence between these county agencies and M&M, there's a problem. And that's what happened with Skyview. That's why we built Skyview. You as a board should get an activity fund report and an athletic fund report with all the balances for the activity funds every month, and you should approve it. You should see the receipts and disbursements going out of the activity funds, and you should see it in the athletic fund also. You should have a personnel committee, because 70% of the budget is salary and benefits. 4 years I sat here, I haven't seen a board member satisfied with what's coming out of personnel. But believe me, Shea is a very good professional. He has spreadsheets on positions, on names, and everything that's going on, because that's the basis for HR, right?
Mr. Bickleman.
That's where you start.
Thank you. Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn? All right, meeting adjourned.